Okay, welcome back. I hope all of you had a good lunch and a little break. So, like I said this morning...
Oh, did Michael rejoin us? Or did we...
Michael, yeah, thanks for the reminder. Michael, are you back on the phone with us? Oh, so he won't be able to join. Okay, thanks. Okay, so like I said, we've certainly covered a lot of grounds. This morning we began by talking about retrospective data and electronic health records and insurance claims data. For this second session, we talked about when conducting prospective, pragmatic clinical trials, is there a need for additional safety monitoring, and what are the contexts that require that? And when does this naturally occurring variability represent a signal that is an important, meaningful question that has to be studied and answered, versus when it's noise that has to be sort of adjusted or explained away? So I think in the next 10 to 15 minutes, we'll attempt to synthesize the contents of the discussion, and then we'll move to the third and final session for the day. So maybe we'll start on the right-hand side with, for those who came late, they could start. So the idea is, tell us the top 2 to 3 concepts that you feel are worth
that came up during the discussion that I didn't hear.
Or when you were here.
Or, in your case,
what should have come up?
Yeah. So we can.
Well,
give you
one thing that should have come up, and I don't know whether it did, is that everybody's obsessing on the use of real-world data as a substitute for controlled trials. As we've written repeatedly, Rob's New England Journal thing says it, and Rachel's thing says it. That's a tough area, and we need more information about how randomized trials compared with those, and we're working on looking. But there are uses of real-world data that are obvious right now, and that would provide tremendous efficiencies for trials, like finding patients with the right disease, finding patients who had the prognostic factors that you're interested in. You could consent people online. That's fairly easy. And all of this stuff, it seems to me, whatever you think about the endpoints that are collected in the real world, that's more debatable. This would make trials enormously easier to carry out. That could go with encouragement within these systems to people to participate in trials because their health is worth it, and by the way, you get the drug free. So the possibility of expanding on regular trials using these systems seems enormous and is understated. I mean, every time we see anybody write anything, we always write that in, to remind them that, yeah, you can do real trials this way. But I think there's tremendous potential there. So without having heard anything, I'll say that for starters.
Yeah, a couple of the things that, struck me that I'd really want to make sure that we remembered, one is, this idea, as Bob brought up, the idea of enrichment trials being especially informative, and then I can't even remember who, pointing out that the old-time enrichment is the new personalized medicine. And that, enrichment trials are not just a way of cheating. Enrichment trials are a way of personalizing treatment and finding out who are the people most likely to benefit. The discussion about blinding, at least to me, was very helpful. The idea that it's foundational that we want a blind outcome assessment and analysis, that the blinding of patients and providers, the answer is it depends. But I think we were actually able to, I won't go into the details here, get a little more specific on the it depends on what. I think we were actually able to come to some specific things it depends on that we want to be able to capture, because too often I think the answer to the blinding question is just reflexive. We've always done it that way rather than thinking through why you would want to do that or not do that. And then also this idea about sort of setting and specifically quality, uniformity, and consistency of care in a particular setting as being an effect modifier, as being something which might alter the observed difference between two treatments, especially one treatment which is more, I would say, operator dependent. If there is a treatment that requires a higher level of skill, consistency, or adherence to be effective, and another treatment which is more, to use the term, idiot-proof. In a low-quality setting, the idiot-proof treatment will outperform, and in a high-quality setting, it might be less likely to. This, as Bob says, the answer is they are both true. I think, we do say if we are designing a trial, especially a trial relatively early for ethical reasons, we would want to assure that the people who are getting the more finicky treatment do at least reach some reasonable standard of care. I don't think we would say to magnify the difference. We would want to intentionally search out bad care and endorse that. But we would say, let's go for something that's, as Ira said about the CSP 590, the sort of augmented suicide prevention care that the VA provides. So those are the things I wanted to make sure I remembered.
In terms of what should have been discussed, I want to resonate with what you said about recruiting from electronic health record data, and that a real ancillary plus from that is being able to crosswalk between study samples and real populations, so you're studying the right patients rather than the textbook abstraction. Clearly important if we're to translate to public health outcomes. I was struck by what the real discussion was about, the notion of adverse effect monitoring, and it's not just an infernal machine built God knows when that has to be turned on and run autonomously regardless of the nature of the study that it's piggybacked on. That for newer agents, it's really designed to estimate effect sizes for adverse events. For established agents, you pointed out that's not an issue, I finally heard, and that it may be a guide to monitoring the quality of care during a study to ensure that adverse events trigger something, but it's not an infernal machine.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe finally, to sort of state the obvious that in the situations where the medical product has wide use and it's being studied in a pragmatic randomized study, the requirements for safety monitoring will not be the same, since we, as pointed out earlier, we already know a great deal about the safety profile of the medical product under investigation. So that puts it in a different context altogether. One thing I'd like to emphasize that I heard repeatedly, and I think maybe drug developers and policymakers don't do a good job, is the question of adherence. I think if we are genuinely interested in having a patient-centered approach that improves patient outcomes, then more thinking on how to incorporate patient adherence into our drug development, but also in our policies. I don't know the answer to this, but I heard that repeatedly, and I think it's a very important question across therapeutic areas and across medical products.
Do you know what the VA hypertension study did to stimulate adherence? They had a several-week pre-treatment period, and they gave a placebo and they put riboflavin in it. Riboflavin, not that anybody's going to know this, glows when you shine a fluorescent light on it. So if your urine didn't glow, you didn't get randomized. And that was in the 70s.
I mean, again, that's an intriguing point, but I think again, it's the question. Yeah.
That's enriching it right there.
Yeah. Okay, with that, I think...
Well, actually, and the one other thing I should have said, because I heard it, and I want to make sure everybody else heard it, Bob told us that a randomized nudge design could actually be used for valid inference to support a new indication for an existing product. So I want to make sure that goes in the minutes.
Okay, well, I think we're all eager to hear about the third session and about randomization and non-randomization. So I'd like to thank the panel very much for their time and their engagement, and I'd like to turn things over to Richard Platt for the next session.